you hear a lot with tariffs, you hear a lot with export bans and things of that nature. Before we start talking about anything like that, well, we need to solve the capability gap. And right now, we don't have the assets in place to process this material. So if tomorrow someone saw fit to place an export ban on e-waste and keep it here, we'd effectively build a stockpile, just a big mountain of this stuff because we do not have the capabilities yet.
All right, Matt. I want to start by just framing this conversation for listeners around Mint Innovation, what you guys are working on. So I want to read off some stats and kind of what's going on in this space that you guys are currently working in. So the United States generates roughly 8 million metric tons of e-waste annually. Of that, 15% gets recycled. The rest ends up in landfills. Of that 15% that does get recycled, it's then shipped overseas for processing, meaning that the U.S. loses all that material, including the critical and strategic metals within it. Meanwhile, we're short on almost every critical mineral, 1 million metric tons short on copper alone, and the deficit is only growing. We got to talk about this in our last interview with Ashley Zimwat, Forbes. Now, you've spent 16 years in metal recycling. You've built and led the recycling division at the world's largest copper fabricator and constructed a $100 million smelter in Kentucky. And you're now running a company that's using chemistry and naturally occurring biomass to extract these critical minerals from the urban mine that we're currently burying. So your argument is that the fence we need to build is one that keeps these valuable materials in. And so I kind of want to kick off the conversation of, why weren't we doing this before, and what's broken about this system? So let's kind of just start the conversation there.
When you look at metals as a whole, I think we have been doing this. You look at the larger market metals, the steel, the aluminum, copper. We do have capabilities here to recycle. I think we have exported some of those technologies over the years, but you've seen some of the larger players reinvesting in that space because they understood they need to control their supply chains. They need to make materials that have a lower carbon footprint because that's what customers are demanding now. So I think those have moved. When you look at the e-waste side, it's not a simple thing to figure out. These are extremely complex materials. You're talking printers and laptops and cell phones, server racks. And if you really think about when those things entered our lives in a major way, it was 25 years ago. So it's much less mature than the other markets. It's much more complicated to deal with. Up until now, you've needed smelters to do so. Those are 7 to 10 year builds that cost $1 billion. The technology had significant emissions, so we let the rest of the world deal with those while we were protecting within our borders. I think where we missed out is those air emissions don't care about borders. They're going to flow wherever. So now I think on one hand, we're bringing it back to control it. I think technology has caught up. We've had a smelter or two built in the U.S. with another one planned. So the technology is there to be able to get permitted for it. Technology is also allowing us to use things like hydrometallurgy, which don't have the issue of emissions. But the other piece is, I think the middle of the market, the data centers, the cell phones, those are the sexy pieces. I think the first thing we realized was we exported our capability to control that supply chain to actually build them. We had the tech to design them, but not to build them. Now, as we bring that back on, and this reshoring effort is amazing. I think manufacturing should be a part of us. It's a part of our DNA for sure. But what we're realizing is if we build those pieces, now we still don't have access to the raw materials to build them. And that's why the current administration is focused so heavily on critical minerals. And the administration before was as well. So while the reshoring has been great, if we don't have access to these raw materials in the US, and every country elsewhere should be thinking the same way, if they don't have this capability domestically, then they're now reminding on the countries where the mines are. And this was true before the last few months, but it's even more true now. These mines are located in more geopolitically risky areas. So we need to take control of that too.
Super interesting. I'm excited to get into all the minutiae around that and all the different rabbit holes we can kind of dive down. But I want to start with your background. You described yourself as a total generalist when we first met on that intro call. You got a marketing degree, a law degree, an MBA. Just tell us how you ended up in this space. What did your path look like to arrive to being president of Mint Innovation?
I think accidental would be an understatement. It's You mentioned the degrees. That's not due to ambition, I would say. That's probably due to lack of having any idea what I wanted to do and school seeming like the safe place to continue. Luckily, during that period, I was exposed to some really smart people who sort of helped me find my own ambition. I left that and ended up in finance at FedEx, which was a great place to be, learn to tell stories, build narratives for boards, see how a massive company that had a real handle on what its drivers were managed itself. I mean, I ended up in the metals industry by absolute accident. My wife's from New Orleans, and we were at a wedding with an open bar. They didn't have enough bartenders, so the line was too long. And I chatted up the guy beside me who happened to be recruiting for a metals company named Novelis I'd never heard of. And 6 months later, I was working for Novelis, and I don't know when in the future I became a metals guy, but one day I woke up and this is where my passion was and what I wanted to be doing.
Funny how life works out like that.
You know, you go from there, and spent 5 years at Novelis getting great experience. That was when they focused on recycling. I was lucky enough to be on the strategy team that helped form that strategy and help deploy assets, went into the business, learned about the opportunity, about the value of what's going in landfills today, learned the challenge of how difficult it is to impact consumer behavior. So it was just I was drinking from the fire hose, but it was wonderful. Then I got the opportunity to move to Louisville with a company called Triaros. Got offered a job, was absolutely unqualified for, became their chief commercial officer, and, spent 80% of the next few years traveling and developing that knowledge. And over time, we fell in love with Louisville, declared it home. From there, went to Veland with a colleague of mine who we'd worked together at Novelis with. So, the metals industry is pretty tight. We tend to recycle ourselves, and everybody knows everybody, which is a great thing. But spent 5 years with Veland, had a great time there. As you mentioned, I built the recycling business unit there, including a $120 million smelter in Kentucky. That's where I got involved with e-waste and realized how big of an opportunity and an issue that we have. And after I got done with Veland, was looking for a way that I could continue down that path, and that's what I found meant.
Super interesting. And I want to also tie it in. You mentioned moving to Louisville, and we're sitting in a fish market right now, which to viewers, they might be like, why in the world are we talking about e-waste recycling in the middle of a fish market? But I loved your reasoning for starting this, or I guess buying the fish market, starting the fish market, expanding it from here in Louisville. So just tell us a little bit about this business that you guys have got up and running here and why we're sitting here today.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, metals and fish, we keep separate. So for anyone who shops here, don't be concerned about that. But
good disclaimer.
It's as I mentioned, we fell in love with Louisville, so it's the first place that my family has called home. I've got 3 young kids, and Louisville's just been absolutely great to us. We've been here for 11 years now. A few years ago, started looking around for ways to get more involved in the community, and being a small business owner seemed like a good way to do that. Also seemed like a good way to diversify and also give my kids somewhere where they could work as they grow up. When I was with Triaros, we were owned by UACJ out of Japan. Spent a lot of time over there, going to Tsukiji Fish Market in the morning, and eating about my weight in sushi every day was my favorite pastime. And they had phenomenal access to fish, obviously. So as I was looking around, a fish market came on the market that had been open for 28 years. It wasn't a chain. It was local. It was a staple here. So I sort of jumped at the opportunity and actually did it with the COO from Triaros, who I worked with for a long time. This gives us a way to stay plugged in. Our families work together on it. His son is highly involved in running the market. And since then, we've gone from 1 shop to 3, continue to grow, and are excited to be able to bring this back to Louisville and bring the access to that high-end fish that we were talking about to the people around us.
Yeah, I love the parallel you're kind of drawing to sustainabilities in the e-waste space, sustainability of seafood, and bringing just good, high quality, healthy food to Louisville. So I love people that go into business and their passions and do it for reasons other than just, you guys have been successful, you made money, but it makes it a little bit more special when you're doing it for reasons like staying connected and adding to your community. So I think that's really, really interesting. So I just want to touch on that before we actually get into Mint Innovation, but let's start diving into the conversation around e-waste and what's actually going on here. So we talked about it at the beginning there, but help us understand the types of materials that Mint Innovation is currently dealing with. So what exactly is e-waste for those who might not be familiar?
Yeah, so e-waste, honestly, I was with Congress back in July and I got asked this exact same question. So it's something that's a little bit ambiguously defined. Let's say, you can define it as anything with a cord, but then you're missing all the battery stuff. So I don't know, anything with an Allen switch, or a cord or a battery. So it's a lot of things. It can be your printer. Some people consider lights to be it. Things with a ballast in it. Your cell phones, obviously, the data centers. You think about our military and all the e-waste there. So it can be any number of things. And when you think about the complexity of these items, you've got plastic, you've got steel, aluminum, you've got copper wiring. And then on the inside, some of them have hard drives, which contain some of the rare earths people keep talking about right now. You've got printed circuit boards, which is where mint comes in, which is basically plastic and copper and silver, tin, silver, tin, and palladium and gold. So there's all these metals that come in to all these items, from data servers down to printers.
And the current solution is 15% of that roughly gets actually captured, recycled, sent overseas for processing. The rest of it, we just throw in landfills right now. It just gets
Yeah. And
wasted.
honestly, these stats are the ones that got me worked up about e-waste, I'll say. That 15% recycle rate. So as you said, we're 7 or 8 million tons generated a year. The 85% that goes to landfill. We landfill a lot of things here and around the world, but in the US, that accounts for about 2 to 3% of landfill volume. But it accounts to up to 80% by some studies of the heavy metals and hazardous materials going into our landfills. So, it's these valuable metals that I'm talking about that are also big issues in landfills and eventually leaching into the ground. So not only are they valuable, but they hurt us as well when we recycle or when we don't recycle them. So figuring out how to tackle that, and then to add insult to injury, as you pointed out, the 15% that gets recycled, we'll break those down here mechanically. We'll take the plastic, we'll take the aluminum and the steel, and those can stay here domestic. But those printed circuit boards and hard drives, ultimately, every single bit of that gets exported. None of that metal's coming back to the U.S.
And so we're basically giving our waste, letting the value be extracted out of it by another country. And then that's just goes into their input streams for these materials rather than being able to, as you put it, build a fence that we want to keep these materials in.
Well,
and go ahead.
Yeah,
That's,
if you
that's
think
what I want to
about
unpack.
if you think about the whole reason for recycling, there's this big sustainability side of it. And right now, to export it around the world, only to have someone else refine it, and then turn around and ship it back around the world to have it imported here, it doesn't make any sense. You take the supply chain risk and vulnerability away from it, just from a logistical perspective, from a common sense perspective. That's not the way anybody would set this thing up.
Right. Right. And I feel like there's just much more of a focus on circularity now. And you didn't, I mean, you said at the beginning, this is something that is relatively new, a new challenge for us. It's only been 25 years that we've really had this e-waste kind of coming into our, waste streamlines and trying to figure out, okay, well, what do we do with it from here? And the line I want to kind of have you unpack is that you want to see us build a fence where we keep this material in. So just kind of elaborate on that and what you mean by that. And then I think we should go ahead and get into how Mint is helping address that.
Yeah, and I guess I'll start with what I don't mean by that. You hear a lot with tariffs, you hear a lot with export bans and things of that nature. Before we start talking about anything like that, we need to solve the capability gap. And right now, we don't have the assets in place to process this material. So if tomorrow someone saw fit to place an export ban on e-waste and keep it here, we'd effectively build a stockpile, just a big mountain of this stuff because we do not have the capabilities yet. And, the answer is to build it. Well, that's what we're trying to do. Like I said, there's a smelter that's recently been built here that can take some e-waste. There's another one that's been announced as a partnership with the government recently. That's going to take a number of years to build. You'll need us, you'll need others. You need some of these battery technologies to make sure that we have these capabilities. We build in 15 months for a plant. Some of the smelters can take 7 to 10 years to build. So it's going to take time to do this. So you need You need an intelligent approach, and I think it's going to combine both government and private industry working together to figure out what is the way that we can incentivize more of these businesses to build here and incentivize the people who are currently exporting to supply those businesses so that we keep it in lockstep with capacity as it comes online.
Well, and this is all happening with the background context of supply chain vulnerabilities around critical minerals as well. And there's now much more focus from the federal government on, okay, we need to solve this. Now, this is not necessarily something that it's not one solution or the other. We keep, like we heard on our interview with Ashley Zumwalt Forbes, we can't recycle our way out of this, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be part of the solution. So I guess when you heard that, you listened to that interview, what was your response to that? How do you kind of place that in the broader context of what's going on right now?
I fully agree. This is not a who's going to win to solve this problem, who's going to make money off of it. It's an and. We'll need smelters for some of the products that we can't recycle. We'll have our sweet spot in the supply chain. We need companies like Redwood, like Ascend. We need others who are developing technology right now. So it's a big problem that needs to be solved. There's a lot of capacity that needs to come online. There's a lot of flexibility that needs to be developed so we can take these different streams and figure out how to efficiently process them. And ultimately, we all have the same goal. Let's keep it here so that we can supply all the companies that have reshored here so we can rebuild the manufacturing muscle in the U.S.
Totally. And I want to get into Mint now. So you guys are specifically dealing with the circuit boards that have all of those critical minerals that you mentioned earlier in the episode. Help us understand what Mint is actually doing differently here. So you mentioned like using a smelter. You guys are using more of like a biological sort of approach to this. How are you guys doing things differently? How are microbes being used to extract things like gold from circuit boards?
Yeah, so Will Barker, our founder, he founded Mint about 9 years ago, and he had a lot of experience in the waste to value space. And one of the things that he discovered as he was going through this is in a lot of cases, you don't have a ton of difference in the value between what you're generating and the waste that it's coming from, which doesn't leave you much space to invest. So he started looking around for where the biggest gap was. Gold tends to be where the gap is. I mean, last I checked, gold was about $160 million a ton, which is staggering. It's probably higher than that based on the way it's been going. So that's where the biggest value is. Where we're different is hydrometallurgy hasn't been really enabled in this space because chemistry is extremely efficient at getting out higher concentrated metals. So it can easily get at the copper, probably the silver and tin. But when you start getting down to the gold, which is over 80% of the value and less than 1% of the material, it's hard to get at that dilute of a metal. So what Will figured out is that gold very much likes being in solid state. And when you're using hydrometallurgy, you're dissolving all the metals into solution. So given gold's desire to become solid, and what you're doing there is you're removing electrons from the surface, he looked at, what can I use to attract it, to give it enough mass to help me get to the gold? That's where the biological matter came in. And you mentioned microbes. Microbes can work, but it can also be much more simple than that. It's any biological matter that we can use there. So when you introduce it, biological material has an excess of electrons on the surface, so you effectively create a magnet that the gold latches onto. And that gives you enough mass to drop that out of the bottom. So what you did there is you created an economic enabler for hydrometallurgy in the space of e-waste. So the reason that matters is we're able to build in a much shorter time period, about 15 months for a plant. We're able to build smaller capacity. We don't need the continental scale that some of the smelters need to draw metal from all around. We'll build about 4,000 tons a year of capacity for each plant. So that allows us to go where the scrap is. It minimizes the logistical footprint, localizes the supply. It allows us to go to OEMs who might want a bespoke facility where they can just have a closed loop right there. So it gives us a whole lot more flexibility and it gives us more agility to try to solve the problem as we go.
So it's super interesting. This seems like it completely changes the economics of how this is traditionally being done with a smelter. And a smelter, I assume, is just using heat to separate these materials out. So maybe if you could just kind of help compare and contrast like the economics of this and the model that you guys are using versus what was there currently. It sounds like this is something that allows for a more decentralized approach, if that's a way to say it. If you can go to some of these manufacturers, and I'm sure we'll talk about HP here in a second as well. Just kind of walk us through like how that actually differs from the economics of this whole thing.
Sure. Well, I mean, from a logistical perspective, obviously you've got a much tighter supply chain there. So from a cash flow perspective, it's a much shorter cycle. And when you're in recycling, cash is king. So you want to turn it over much more quickly. So that's one service that we hope to provide to some of our suppliers, is being able to shorten their cash cycle, increase transparency as we go. Smelters are incredibly efficient. They're extremely good at what they do. But when they're filling their furnaces, they have to keep those full. And they'll use a combination of materials, be it e-waste, slag, copper, any number of things. They put it into the bath, which is highly efficient, but what they lose there is batch traceability. One of the announcements that just came out yesterday was our partnership with Hewlett-Packard to develop closed loop recycled copper. So because of the batch nature of our process, we're able to have a discrete batch of HP end-of-life assets that we run through our process and have third-party certified that when we supply the copper sheets out of the back end to go into their new products, it's made up of nothing but HP. So they can totally certify the supply chain, the chain of custody as they go through this. And this is of interest to many, many brands out there: automotive OEMs, electronics OEMs, luxury jewelers. You start thinking about the sensitivity they've had around the diamond supply chain. They're looking for gold, they're looking for silver, palladium. So it applies to everyone. Right now we're, taking our commercial pilot plant that we've got in Sydney. We're looking at it from an efficiency perspective on how do we decrease the chemicals? How do we reduce the cycle time, and start to get down that cost curve? But with our recovery of metals right now, we believe that we're able to compete with smelters.
I love I think the phrase in the press release about the Hewlett-Packard project is that it was recycled metals as a service. I think that's a really interesting way to frame this, especially as you talk about like OEMs and how you can kind of go inside and have a bespoke model there. Is that what scale and growth looks like for you guys, or is it a combination of working with some of these OEMs plus having facilities that bring in materials from all around? Or where do you, like, as you're looking into the future, where does growth come from for Mint?
Sure. I mean, if you look at what's currently in the U.S., I believe last I checked, there were about 900 certified e-waste recyclers in the country. So they're doing a good job. There's an infrastructure there to take back from the public, to service OEMs. So trading with those guys, using them as our key suppliers, is absolutely a part of the model. We can't do everything ourselves, but also the ability to meet OEMs where they are. Each and every OEM out there has different goals, different ways they measure success. They've got different focus. So be it chain of custody, be it carbon footprint, economics, whatever it is, they're all looking for something different. If I look at the data center industry, these guys have spent billions and billions developing their IP. They want to protect it. If I look at the military, it's all the sensitive data that goes across it. They want to protect that. So for those two, we've developed a way to go to them and shred their material on site down below 2 millimeter, which meets NSA specification. So that way they have the peace of mind knowing that the IP, the data is protected. With other OEMs, they're looking for their specific materials. The batch process allows us to do that for them. With the open market, it's the cash cycle, being able to turn these materials over more quickly so that they can deploy that capital again to make more margins so they can grow. So it's being part of this whole ecosystem. But if you look at the US, I mean, I mentioned we're 4,000 tons per year. The market right now is growing between 8 and 14% per year, depending on what study you read. And that's due to the data center proliferation, the military growth. We can easily see 10 plus plants in the United States alone.
That's incredible. And let's talk about one of the first U.S. commercial facilities in Longview, Texas. Talk us through the status of that and what it'll look like when it's operational.
Sure. So we've got a facility leased in Longview right now. We're doing it in phases. We've got our sampling line. The equipment's all been delivered, and what a sampling line allows us to do is shred the materials and then do metallic assays on them, so that we can actually have transparency around what the metal content was in them. That allows us to start working with local partners. The larger hydromet facility, we're currently talking with strategic investors right now to build that facility and also clear a pathway for growth and expansion in the U.S. So as soon as that gets unlocked, you're looking at basically N plus 15, as I said, to build that plant.
Interesting. And why Longview? How is that location chosen? Or how do you guys think about choosing locations to put these facilities?
Sure. Well, you go where the material is. Um, and, Longview itself is, if you drew a triangle between Houston, Dallas, and Shreveport, it's basically right in the middle. So when you're driving out there, you're like, there's not feedstock here. It's close to everything. So you can pull from all those metros. As I mentioned, this material is moving around the world right now. So pulling from a 100-mile radius is nothing. Um, you're also close enough to the Mexican border to reach into Juarez and Monterrey, where volumes are growing like crazy. The manufacturing boom there is not insignificant. There's a lot of military bases around, so we can service there. Texas has an overall very friendly business environment. And then the other piece of Longview is there's a big chemical industry presence there. One of the things that we'll probably get to later is workforce development and making sure that we have the right teams. So because that's already there, Longview has a talent pool from which to pull. Their trade schools know how to develop the talent because we're basically a chemical factory as well. So we're able to pull people in who have experience there. And that experience will help us be more efficient. And most importantly, it'll help us be safer.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue because that was going to be my next question was about the workforce side of this. I mean, give us a sense of what the workforce situation looks like currently. Is there a shortage? Is there a need to stand up more trade schools like you mentioned? I mean, what kind of skills do you even hire for with something like that?
I think it's getting better. If you look a few years back, there was an extreme crunch. I think states have taken a step up and started looking at it. One of the things I've been able to do here in Kentucky was I was involved in the founding of a group called MI2. And this was basically a pre-competitive group of metals companies based in Kentucky. And there's a lot of them. I mean, you've got Novelis, Nucor, North America Stainless, Trieros, Novelis. So this is a massive footprint. I think there were something like 38,000 direct metals jobs in the state. So what we were trying to figure out was, my 75 jobs that I'm going to create over the next 5 years is interesting. I'm not going to get a school to create a curriculum to focus on what we're doing. So we came together and with the governor's support, created basically a metals cluster where we could combine our voice, get university presidents involved, get the governor involved, and start creating the path to develop that talent. So that's just an example of things that happened here that are happening around as well. With our piece around Longview specifically, like I said, they've been focused on that area. So I would say that that's a bit of a microcosm where they're already ahead of the game. We need to continue as a country to sort of backtrack from what it's been, where manufacturing, I'm not going to say it was demonized, but it sure was. I didn't see a lot of people coming out of high school saying, man, I can't wait to go into a career of manufacturing. It's actually a spectacular career. It gives you the opportunity to be a citizen of the world. I had no idea I was getting into the space. I come from a town of 20,000 in Alabama, where I didn't even need a passport till I got married. And now I've spent 150,000 miles a year for the last 16 years running, being all around the world. So it's just been a wonderful opportunity for me and my family. I've seen it do the same for others. So we need to embrace that as a country and make sure people understand that the trades are a wonderful place to go.
I think the vibe seems to be catching up there of we need to get back into producing things in the real world. I think I wonder how much lag there's going to be behind the vibe to putting things into actual practice, and we see an actual shift into more young people want to go into trades and want to go into working these types of jobs. But that's a big reason why I wanted to start Mission Critical, is because I believe it is so important to have America begin reinvesting in things in the real world. With artificial intelligence, it feels like everything digital and software wise is on a little bit of unstable footing now. We just don't know how it's going to shake out, and that's making it a little bit difficult for people to really continue investing in it and wanting to pursue career paths in it. So I just think that that's the right direction for the country. I don't know if we even know exactly what it'll look like by the time all this shakes out and all the career changes happen. But I do get excited when thinking about it and talking about it. I want to talk about the political side and the policy side of this and kind of what it takes. You mentioned you actually testified to Congress about this. I want you to start by telling the story of flying in from New Zealand and kind of what you had to do to get in front of Congress. But what was your message and just kind of how was it received?
Sure. So, I mean, I'm excited that it's getting the attention that it's getting. Now trying to take all that energy that's in Washington and sort of filter it down into a place that's helpful is the challenge. So any chance that I ever get, or hopefully any chance any of the other leaders in the metal space get to go and try to educate, because it's more complicated than it seems on the surface. But any chance we get to go speak to people who have that power, who are willing to listen, I hope everybody takes advantage of that. So, I got the call on a Friday morning in Sydney. I was down visiting our plant, our team, and I think it was like 4 a.m. because for any of the listeners who've traveled, they understand that that's sleeping late with that jet lag. But I got the call from Washington, and they were saying that they had a subcommittee meeting on recycling coming up, and they wanted to talk to me about potentially speaking there. So I talked with them briefly, and then a couple hours later, they said, "Hey, it's next Wednesday. Can you be here?" It's like, let me look. My initial reaction was, "There's no way in the world I could possibly get back," because I still had to go to New Zealand to see the rest of my team. So after evaluating it, I figured that whatever I needed to do to get there needed to get done. So I changed my travel plans, went to New Zealand for like 2 days, and I ended up flying out at like 7 o'clock at night, Tuesday night. Got to DC 11 o'clock at night, Tuesday night. So quite a long day.
Yeah.
But no, it was a great experience. We had a lot of interest, a lot of people coming from different angles. Everyone seemingly trying to be positive with it and figuring out a way to help, whether it was from the right side or the left side, which is encouraging, because when politics I mean, this is truly a bipartisan issue. It doesn't matter whether you're focused on sustainability, economic profitability, job creation, national security. It ticks all those boxes. So once I can get people past the politics of it and we start trying to solve a problem, there's a lot of smart people up there who want to help. And that's how it was received. It wasn't people arguing that we don't have an issue. Everyone acknowledges we have an issue. Everyone acknowledges we have an opportunity. And they acknowledge that the status quo just ain't going to get it.
Mm. So it sounds like there's kind of widespread agreement around this. I wanted to give you a chance to kind of talk about your experience, specifically here in Kentucky and working with, in particular, Bashir's administration, and just what it takes from an economic development perspective, and the willingness of Governor Bashir specifically to go and kind of help out with these projects. I just feel like that needs to become more of the norm, and that's hopefully the vibe that we see going forward. But what was your experience like with Governor Bashir specifically?
Sure. And I'll start at Kentucky as a whole. I've talked about how much we love it here in Louisville, but Kentucky's been phenomenal. They are extremely business friendly. And, I think the governor, he's a Democrat. I think most of the rest of the state is red. So you would think that in most instances, just based on what we see on TV, that wouldn't work very well together. Well, where Kentucky's been different for me is the governor went to Washington multiple times to lobby on our behalf. The Secretary of Economic Development, Jeff Knoll, as well, worked there. They didn't even make their politics my problem. Judge Dan Eisen out in Shelbyville when we were building, was a judge executive there. They worked together regardless of which side of the aisle they came on. Never became an issue for me. All they were worried about was, how do we make Kentucky a friendly place for you to do business? We need more of that, I think, nationally. Not to get political at all. I'm fairly apolitical myself, but seeing both sides, understanding that their job is to work together to help us move forward versus pointing out why the other one's wrong. We need more of that.
I'm curious about your optimism in the space at the moment. We definitely have problems right now, but how do you kind of position yourself and your optimism around what's being done in the space, and kind of what we talked about with the bipartisan support around that? I mean, is this something that you feel good about where we are currently, or is it we need a lot more work? I mean, kind of just frame your thoughts and your optimism around the space currently.
Well, I think both statements you made are correct. I feel good about it because we're addressing it. There's a ton of work to get done. One of my favorite sayings is good news is bad news delivered early. I don't know how early we are right now, but we're at least addressing the problem. So long as you've got your head in the sand, you're not doing anything about it. All we can do is address what's in front of us. And I think we're pouring every single bit of resource that we have into solving this problem right now. We'll either get there or not. Um, and we don't have to get all the way there, I don't think, but moving towards the right solution, is all we can do right now.
I want to talk about the consumer behavior side of this as well. It sounds like you've had experience trying to get consumers to recycle in the past, and we all know. I feel like myself included. It's something that you, as a consumer, you wonder, okay, if I'm making the effort to recycle, let's say, an aluminum can, where is this actually going? Is this actually being effective? All that sort of thing. We can talk about that specifically for e-waste, but how do you go about changing consumer behavior and adding more, I guess, just faith in the system?
It's a challenge. We as consumers, and specifically American consumers, are a little bit more difficult to control because we're all coming from a different place.
Mm.
I sat on the board of an organization called the Recycling Partnership for about 5 years. And that organization focuses on consumer education and municipality education. So it goes into municipalities, helps them to understand how to more efficiently process the material that does come to them, provides grants to go from those tiny bins of recycling to the larger rolling bins. So you're going up to 65 gallons. Because what you find is, I don't care who you are, when you run out of space in that little bin, everything becomes trash. No one likes to stockpile this stuff, and very few people are willing to drive it to a separate location. So just that increase in capacity has a big impact on it. But then they went in trying to educate consumers on, you can throw this away, you can throw that away. The plastic thing, I think, frustrates everyone because you can't tell what grade it is. The glass, is it recyclable? Is it not? Are they throwing it in the trash? If I've heard many, many people be frustrated about that. The cardboard, there's just so much mass in it, that it's actually making us backtrack in some of our recycling of other materials. Aluminum cans was something that was near and dear to my heart. We're about a 50% recycle rate, so we're throwing well in excess of $1 billion of aluminum in the landfill each and every year. And that's easy. That's a simple thing to recycle. You compare and contrast that to e-waste and what I was talking about. We don't know where to take it. We're scared that the banking app on our iPhone is somehow going to get hacked into. So, even myself, as someone in the industry, I think between my kids and my wife, we probably have 7 or 8 old iPhones and iPads laying around the house that I need to go recycle. So it just gets far more difficult as you go to the more complex materials. But if you get down to the question that you asked, how do we change consumer behavior? I think the altruistic sustainability side of it has gone where it's going to go. The people who respond to that, I think it's they're already responding to it. Industry, I think we're putting the pressure on them to make sure all the industrial scrap is going. People are taking control of their supply chain and responsibility for their supply chain. It's the rest of the consumers that I think we need to figure out how to meet them where they are. Deposit legislation on the aluminum side has made a big impact from a can recycling perspective. I'd seen a stat that's something like 85% recycle rates in deposit states, where they give you a nickel when you recycle, and then 15 to 20% in non-deposit states. To be clear, that aluminum can's worth 2.5 to 3 cents on its own with where aluminum prices are right now. So you've got an incremental penny or two that's driving that change in behavior. And what we've done is we have made it clear that you put a nickel in and you want your nickel back. So, we're capitalists. We're going to go get our nickel. But the other thing we've done is put reverse vending in supermarkets and convenience stores. So we've made it easy. People are busy. They don't want to go out of their way. So I think we need to look at things like that and figure out, how do we fit this into people's lives and quit expecting them to change their lives in order to do something about it.
I'm the same way. I have 2 old laptops that aren't doing me any good. That's just like, what do I do with them? I don't even know where I should take them. And I think if we can make it feel relevant to the consumer of how this plays into America's broader competitiveness in manufacturing and critical minerals, then it's all pieces of a larger whole. But yeah, it's the e-waste thing is such a interesting problem because I feel like that's most people. It just sits and collects dust because nobody knows what to do with them. I want to talk about the background context of artificial intelligence, and on the front end, it's really driving a lot of investment in building out things like data centers. Trying to onshore manufacturing, and there's just so many downstream effects of this new kind of boom that we're having with artificial intelligence. I'm wondering how you're seeing the effects of that on Mint innovation itself. Like, how is AI impacting how you operate a business at the moment?
Well, one, the data center side of it, as I mentioned, is a boon for us because they want to get their IP protected on the backside. And these are going to be very quickly turned assets because they have to keep up with where the technology is going. Otherwise, they're not going to be competitive. So protecting that IP on the backside, closing that loop, providing those materials back so that we actually have enough of the materials to make the next round of semiconductors and boards and servers for these data centers. So it's driving our business on the demand side for sure. Um, on the AI side, from a manufacturing perspective, there's a lot of different ways to deploy it. There's a lot of manufacturing facilities out there who have collected so much data over time that you almost don't know what to do with it. You don't know, you get lost in it. So I think using the intelligence there to help create conclusions that you can draw, inferences, be able to drive preventative maintenance on your equipment. I've seen where you detect micro vibrations in mills, and this prevents catastrophic failures on those assets, which can create weeks and weeks, if not longer, of downtime. So I think it's going to create more efficiency, more uptime on equipment. Where I start to get concerned about it is on the white collar side. I love it. I think it's fascinating. Every time I start using it, it's fascinating how quickly it can get me up to speed on something. That's not always correct. So you have to have that experience to be able to sniff test it, to be able to challenge it, to dive deeper and push. But the last 20 years of my career, I've been building narratives, working on models, understanding the industry. So got a bit of that, call it industrial wisdom or knowledge behind me to help me to do that. So I'm able to use it as a tool. Where I start to get concerned is when people coming out of school have access to that and it's an easy button. We don't learn very much when we get something right. We learn when we fail. And those awkward meetings with my bosses early on in my career, when I bring something to them and they look at me like I'm an idiot and say, that doesn't make any sense. That drove more of my success than anything. So, I worry that we're going to let people skip the step where they truly develop and they start using it as a crutch versus a tool. So I just need to figure out a way to balance that. And that's as an employer and a parent.
Yeah, I feel like that's the most pressing issue with it right now is the first jobs that are easiest to automate are going to be entry level positions. We're
How
able
do
to
you
train.
create your next leaders?
Exactly. I think I saw it was IBM that is really leaning into that and trying to hire more, anticipating that if we don't, like, who's going to be the next generation that kind of takes over. And I think just for any young people listening, the best thing you can do right now is just become AI native, understand how to use the tools. But I think your advice is spot on. Don't use them as a crutch. Like, you still have to develop your own taste, your own wisdom for whatever you're working on. And it's really hard to develop if you're not, like you're saying, in the arena and failing. You have
It's all
to,
about the struggle.
you have to strike. You have to get yourself uncomfortable. You have to be willing to put yourself out there. You have to be willing to fail 100%. I'm curious with artificial intelligence, just the broader business right now, like, what are some of the areas that you're seeing acceleration happen, or what keeps you from moving faster currently? So you mentioned being able to build in like 15 months right now. What drives being able to build in 12 months and keeps driving that number down? Or is that incredibly fast already and you don't see it getting much faster?
I mean, it's relatively fast. We're able to drop into existing warehouse spaces, so we don't have to do a lot of site work. And I think site work is, one, it takes a long time. Two, you can't see what's under the ground. So it's a major unknown when people are building greenfields. So you really don't know what you're getting into until you actually put a shovel in the dirt. So we're able to avoid that. For us, 15 months is where we're starting. Obviously, we've built one commercial prototype in Sydney. We're working on expanding that now to get it out of the prototype and into manufacturing. We've designed what we're going to build in Longview, and we'll build that. But we're building that muscle every single time that we build. So my expectation is that we'll continue to get that timeline down. We'll start to figure out the equipment suppliers that we can truly rely on, because the quality of your equipment supplier, having done greenfields, that's critical. You don't have the right supplier, your project is not going to go the way that you want it to. So having that list of trusted partners who can do that, the GCs and the EPCs who know what you're trying to build, and just the general know-how of how you commission these plants is what's going to speed them up.
Love that. Well, as we wrap up here, just going back to what's next for Mint Innovation, you guys have the Longview facility and now the HP partnership you've just announced here. What are you guys looking to in the next year to 3 years? Where are you guys growing towards?
And so right now we're in talks with multiple strategic investors. As I mentioned before, we see a huge growth curve here. We're focused on servicing, first and foremost, the hydrometallurgical process so that we can recover the metals and have them domestic. But we're also looking to how do we meet the market where the market is. So from a government perspective and going after the feedstock that's there, which is a national asset right now, but it's also a national security risk. The data that sits on there that is stockpiled needs to be processed and it needs to be returned to the domestic industry so it's supporting us. So we're working on that from a mobile destruction perspective and data security perspective. Servicing the data centers, protecting that IP. Getting the sampling line up and then ultimately getting this round closed so that we can build out Longview and 2 to 3 other sites in that period. So it's just the beginning. I think the US is our focus right now. We're also shoring up Australia where we already are. And then we've got conversations globally with a couple of other OEMs who are interested in more bespoke type facilities. So, that's what I see right now. It's a very fluid space. And this is a massive problem to solve. So priorities shift.
Well, I'm excited to continue keeping up with you guys. It's been awesome understanding how you guys are approaching the space, how you're playing into the broader ecosystem around critical minerals and supply chain. Where can people keep up with you and with Mint Innovation as you guys achieve some of these milestones?
We'll post, Mint has a LinkedIn profile where they stay active, and I'll repost when things happen, try to get the word out whenever we can, but I would say just follow us there, and we're getting news out as soon as we make it and trying to keep this first or at the forefront of everyone's mind.
Awesome. Thanks for taking the time, Matt. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you.